And yesterday, the governor signed SB 50, was it 2?
54.
54. And we are now officially, what we've been unofficially for years, a sanctuary state. And this is some state we find ourselves in where we are essentially passing a slew of new laws every 5 seconds, it seems, banning this, banning that, creating new penalties for some things, especially for the law-abiding. But if you break the law, man, we want to make it as easy as possible to get out of jail free. And the latest one makes no sense. In a state where we have passed a raft of new gun control laws, we're literally, with SB 620, reducing the penalties for actually using them. To talk to us about this, here is the president of the Association of Deputy District Attorneys. Welcome back to the show, Michele Hanisee. Michele, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for coming on. So this makes no sense. Senator Stephen Bradford is the philosopher king who came up with this doozy, and he chose as the poster boy for this legislation a guy who perpetrated a drive-by shooting.
Well, that was his second poster child after we caught his proponent lying about the first poster child. So the first poster child was Travis Manning, who they said was woefully sentenced under this law using a BB gun to steal some small amount of property, when in fact he terrorized teenagers and children at a video game store with a real gun. So he got called out on that lie and had to try to find a second poster child. But the fact of the matter is you can't find a good poster child for this cause because none exists.
What in the world are they thinking other than they just don't want anybody to be in jail?
Yeah, it's the criminal apologists who want to spare criminals who terrorize their communities from having to suffer any harsh consequences for their actions. Meanwhile, they're trying to take any possible guns away from law-abiding citizens, but, you know, what do they want to put them in the hands of criminals and reduce penalties for using guns and crimes.
I can't even wrap my head around this. In a state that has passed prohibitions on ammunition, on peripherals, on virtually every kind of gun, the same people that want to keep the hardware out of people's hands apparently don't want to keep the people who have actually used them in the commission of a crime behind bars. I mean, the disconnect is, this is one of these where you need duct tape to wrap around your skull to keep your head from popping.
Agreed. What are they thinking? Because they're completely inconsistent with themselves.
So where does this thing stand?
It's sitting on the governor's desk, waiting to see if he approves it. That's where we stand right now, and there's no way to know what he will do. But his agenda, most recently, has been to release as many convicted criminals as possible back into our communities as early as possible. So, unfortunately, this bill is right in line with that agenda.
We're talking about Michele Hanisee, who's the president of the Association of Deputy District Attorneys. The website, by the way, is LAADDA.com. LAADDA.com. I've always thought, Michele, that the single dumbest code on the books is attempted murder. I've always thought that attempted murder should be stricken from the charges that can be filed against somebody, because to me, if you shoot at somebody in the commission of a crime or stab somebody, you try to take somebody's life, and the paramedics get there quickly and the trauma team does a magnificent job and the technology's improved and they're able to save someone's life who in an earlier time would have bled out or died from their injuries, and you get a lesser sentence because of the heroic medical response of first responders. Once you pull the trigger in the commission of a crime, you're trying to kill somebody. I don't know why you get a bonus for being a bad shot.
Well, we basically reward criminals for doing their job poorly. It's true. But that's one of the things this law was meant to address. It does include crimes where victims are shot and injured and killed with guns, but also where a gun is used, meaning brandished or discharged. It only applies to certain violent crimes. It doesn't apply to every crime. So it's pretty limited to how it's applied. But that's the whole point. If you're going to use a gun and basically up the violence level of any crime and terrorize people, there need to be some additional penalties.
Well, and obviously in the wake of what just took place in Las Vegas, we're likely to see, if not at the federal level, we're certainly likely to see more legislation in California pushing back against private gun ownership. The bump stocks, I think, will no longer be legally available, and it's hard to make an argument on that one. But let me ask you a bigger. I mean, this is so nuts that I don't even know what question to ask you, Michele, because you just read it, and they can't even make an argument for it. The person that they've chosen as their victim, quote unquote, their poor slob who needs justice to be served, is a guy who opened fire into a crowd of kids. So, it really requires no common sense rebuttal in any place other than California. But we have made progress in the pushback against wholesale murder. Those of us who have been around and covering these stories since the mid-'90s remember when there were thousands and thousands of people being killed in this city. Forget about the rest of the state. And while we still have hundreds of people killed, it's not like the bad old days of the late 90s when we had stories that were coming across the wire services that sounded like if we had crossed out South L.A. and put in Fallujah or someplace in Iraq or Afghanistan, the story would have sounded fine. But we've got a problem with gun violence, and we end up in these circular arguments over Second Amendment rights versus we now got people calling for the repeal of the Second Amendment, including the conservative columnist for the New York Times, Bret Stephens. What should we be doing here? I mean, we need to do something more than what we are doing, but what should we be doing from a law enforcement position?
Well, the ugly truth about incarceration is there is a sense in which it works, because when you lock up the bad guys, they can't hurt other people. Okay? No one likes to hear that, but it's true. There are some people who can't be rehabilitated. There are some people who just like being mean, who like committing crime. So that's where incarceration works. But we've moved into a de-incarceration mode in California, emptying out the state prison with things like AB 109, Prop 47, Prop 57, and the result that we're seeing is a rising violent crime rate. The last 3 years, we have had a rising violent crime rate, and it's drastically rising. It's not a slow incline. Our communities are feeling it. There is just an epidemic of burglaries in every community you look to. So when crime went down is when we got tough on crime, when 3 strikes was passed in its very harshest first version, when we enacted victims' rights like Marcy's Law, which was enacted into the state constitution. Tough on crime laws reduce crime. It's that simple.
Well, we'll continue to follow this, and maybe common sense will prevail. Every once in a while, Jerry Brown surprises us and actually vetoes one of these things. But again, it's disturbing in the extreme to think that we're counting on Jerry Brown to be the voice of common sense in the state of California now. But the legislature is completely out of control. LAADDA.com, the president of the Association of Deputy District Attorneys, Michele Hanisee. Thanks so much, Michele. Appreciate it.
Have a great day.
Okay.